Hosea's primary message was to the northern kingdom of Israel. His message was that the time of Israel's judgment had come. We learned that Hosea's wife's name, Gomer, means to cease or come to an end. Their son's name, Jezreel, means God will sow. God would sow judgment at the Valley of Jezreel. Jezreel was where King Ahab's son Jehoram was killed by Jehu under God's direction. But Jehu failed to follow God's commandments, and his line was destined to end after 4 generations. Hosea announced that that time had come. Hosea 1:4 and 5. Then the Lord said to him, "Call his name Jezreel, for in a little while I will avenge the blood of Jezreel on the house of Jehu, and bring an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. It shall come to pass in that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel." What form would this judgment take? How is it connected to the Valley of Jezreel? What did this mean for the southern kingdom of Judah? I'm Brenda Cathcart, and this is the Voice of the Prophets. After announcing that God would bring an end to the house of Israel, Hosea provides further detail through the birth of Hosea's next 2 children. Hosea 1:6. And she conceived again and bore a daughter. Then God said to him, "Call her name Lo-ruhamah, for I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away." The name of the second child, Lo-ruhamah, is number 3819 in Strong's Concordance, meaning no pity or no mercy. The prefix lo means no or not. Ruhamah is a form of the word raham, number 7355 with a feminine ending. Raham is usually translated mercy. It means to fondle, to love, to be compassionate, to have mercy or pity. We can understand the greater implications of this daughter named No Mercy when we look at another word that has the same root. That word is womb, number 7358, rechem. There are 2 Hebrew words referring to the womb. The first is beten, number 990, from a root word meaning hollow. Beten is used in reference to the physical womb. The word rechem, however, is used most often in reference to opening or closing the womb. It has an action associated with it. For example, Jacob's wife Rachel was barren, but God opened her womb. Genesis 30:22. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. The first use of the word rechem was after Abraham had passed Sarah off as his sister, and God shut the wombs of the house of Abimelech. When Sarah was returned, Abraham prayed that God would open their wombs. Genesis 20:18, for the Lord had closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Racham, to have mercy or pity, has the connotation of loving that which comes from the womb, as of loving your own child. To emphasize this connection with the womb, Lo-ruhamah was female. When God says he will have no mercy on Israel, he goes on to say that he will cause their wombs to miscarry. Hosea 9:14 through 16. Give them, O Lord, what will you give? Give them a miscarrying womb and dry breasts. All their wickedness is in Gilgal, for there I hated them. Because of the evil of their deeds, I will drive them from my house. I will love them no more. All their princes are rebellious. Ephraim is stricken, their root is dried up. They shall bear no fruit. Yes, were they to bear children, I would kill the darlings of their womb. After announcing that God would have no mercy on Israel, Hosea interjects that God would continue to have mercy on Judah. Hosea 1:7. Yet I will have mercy on the house of Judah, will save them by the Lord their God, and not save them by bow, nor by sword or battle, by horses or horsemen. Hosea prophesies that God will miraculously intervene on Judah's behalf, and not by using the power of Judah's armies. God would save them by his own might. This happened during the reign of Hezekiah. When Judah was surrounded on all sides by the Assyrian army, Hezekiah sends emissary to the prophet Isaiah, asking for him to intervene with God. 2 Kings 19:3. And they said to him, "Thus says Hezekiah, this day is a day of trouble and rebuke and blasphemy, for the children have come to birth, but there is no strength to bring them forth." Hezekiah is subtly asking God through Isaiah to open the womb and have compassion on them. God answers Hezekiah's prayer and saves Judah by himself. 185,000 Assyrian soldiers die overnight. 2 Kings 19:34 and 35. For I will defend this city to save it for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. And it came to pass on a certain night that the angel of the Lord went out and killed in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. And when people arose early in the morning, there were the corpses all dead. After this reassurance to Judah, Hosea continues to relay God's coming judgment against Israel through the birth of Hosea's third child. Hosea's third child was a son named Lo-Ammi. Hosea 1:8 and 9. Now when she had weaned Lo-Ruhamah, she conceived and bore a son. Then God said, "Call his name Lo-Ammi, for you are not my people, and I will not be your God." The name Lo-Ammi is number 3818, not my people. Contrast this with God's words that he told Moses to speak to the children of Israel while they were in Egypt. Exodus 6:7. I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God who brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. God repeated this promise to take the children of Israel as his people at Mount Sinai, and again 40 years later as they were poised to enter the promised land. Deuteronomy 26:17 through 19. Today you have proclaimed the Lord to be your God, and that you will walk in his ways and keep his statutes, his commandments, and his judgments, and that you will obey his voice. Also today, the Lord has proclaimed you to be his special people, just as he promised you, that you should keep all his commandments, and that he will set you high above all nations which he has made, in praise, in name, and in honor, and that you may be a holy people to the Lord your God, just as he has spoken. Israel did not keep God's commandments. As a result, instead of being set high above the nations, they would be taken into captivity as slaves. They would no longer be his people. After the death of King Jeroboam, Jeroboam's son Zechariah took the throne. But he only reigned for 6 months before he was assassinated. His successor only managed to hold the throne for 1 full month. Yes, the scripture describes this reign as a full month. 2 Kings 15:13. Shallum, the son of Jabesh, became king in the 39th year of Uzziah, king of Judah, and he reigned a full month in Samaria. Shallum was assassinated 1 month later by Menahem, who reigned for 10 years. It sounds like after 2 assassinations that Israel was back to business as usual under a new lineage. 2 Kings 15:17 and 18. In the 39th year of Azariah, king of Judah, Menahem the son of Gadi became king over Israel and reigned 10 years in Samaria. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not depart all his days from the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who had made Israel sin. However, 10 is the number of the end of a cycle. There were 10 generations from Adam to Noah, and then God destroyed the earth. There were 10 generations from Noah to Abraham, and then God called Abraham. There were 10 generations from Judah's son Peretz to David, when God established the kingship of the line of Judah. In this case, the 10 years signals the end of the northern kingdom of Israel, reinforcing the meaning of the name of Hosea's wife Gomer as ceasing or coming to an end. The empire of Assyria under King Pul began its assault on Israel. 2 Kings 15:19 and 20. Pul, king of Assyria, came against the land, and Menahem gave Pul 1,000 talents of silver, that his hand might be with him to strengthen the kingdom under his control. And Menachem exacted the money from Israel, from all the very wealthy, from each man 50 shekels of silver to give to the king of Assyria. The king of Assyria turned back and did not stay there in the land. King Menachem was forced to pay tribute to the king of Assyria. Israel would never be fully independent again. After King Menachem, Pekah reigned for 20 years, followed by Hosea, the last king of Israel, who reigned 9 years. When we add on the 7 months that Zechariah and Shallum reigned, we get 40 years. It was in the 40th year after Jeroboam's death that Assyria carried Israel away into captivity. Judgment had come on Israel. 2 Kings 17, 5 and 6. Now the king of Assyria went throughout all the land, and went up to Samaria and besieged it for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hosea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away to Assyria, and placed them in Hala and by the Habor, the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. The writer of 2 Kings goes on to detail all the ways that Israel had departed from the covenant they had made with God at Mount Sinai. He concludes that only the tribe of Judah was left. 2 Kings 17:18. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel, and removed them from his sight, and there was none left but the tribe of Judah alone. God did not leave Israel without hope, though. He goes on to say that this exile from his sight would not be permanent. He promised that there would be a day when the number of Israel would be as the sand of the sea, and they would once more be accepted as his people. Hosea 1:10. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said to them, You are not my people, there it shall be said to them, You are sons of the living God. Those who God rejected, saying they were not his people, would once again be acknowledged as a people of God, and their numbers would be as many as the sand of the sea. The last time the children of Israel had been described as being as numerous as the sand of the sea was under the reign of Solomon, before the nation of Israel split into 2 parts. 1 Kings 4:20 and 21. Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand by the sea in multitude, eating and drinking and rejoicing. So Solomon reigned over all kingdoms, from the river to the land of the Philistines, as far as the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Hosea spoke of a time when Israel will once more be God's people, and it will happen at the same place where he rejected them. This will happen at Jezreel. Judah and Israel together will choose one king. Hosea 1:11. Then the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and appoint for themselves one head, and they shall come out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. The judgment Hosea spoke of, that began at Jezreel in the captivity of Israel, would end at Jezreel with their deliverance. Great will be the day that God will sow. The phrase shall come up is the Hebrew word Allah, number 5927, meaning to ascend or shoot forth as of vegetation. God will plant Jezreel, and Israel will shoot forth Allah from out of the land. In other words, Israel will sprout and grow. The king they choose will not be a king who comes in and conquers or takes control. This is a king that is chosen and accepted by all. The early kings of Israel, before they split into 2 kingdoms, were chosen by a consensus of the tribes. The selection of Saul was approved by consensus. 1 Samuel 10:24. And Samuel said to all the people, Do you see him whom the Lord has chosen, that there is no one like him among all the people? So all the people shouted and said, Long live the king. David was first rejected as king by all but the tribe of Judah. After 7 years as king over only Judah, the rest of Israel accepted David as king. 2 Samuel 5:1-3. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and spoke, saying, Indeed, we are your bone and your flesh. Also in time past, when Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel out and brought them in. And the Lord said to you, You shall shepherd my people Israel and be ruler over Israel. Therefore all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. Later, the 10 tribes of Israel would reject David's line as king by rejecting David's grandson Rehoboam. This act established the northern kingdom of Israel under Jeroboam, son of Nebat, from the tribe of Ephraim. Hosea said that there would be a time when Israel and Judah would once more select a king together. In the place where they were rejected, God will once again accept them as his people and show Israel affectionate love. Hosea 2:1. Say to your brethren, my people, and to your sisters, mercy is shown. Then God will gather them back to the land. Isaiah 11:11 through 13. It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people who are left, from Assyria and Egypt, from Pathros and Cush, from Elam and Shinar, from Hamath and the islands of the sea. He will set up a banner for the nations, and will assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the 4 corners of the earth. Also the envy of Ephraim shall depart, and the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not harass Ephraim. The enmity between Judah and Ephraim that began in the days of Rehoboam, son of Solomon, king of Judah, and Jeroboam, son of Nebat, king of Israel, will be healed. They will accept the king that God raises up for them. Jeremiah 30:9. But they shall serve the Lord their God, and David their king, whom I will raise up for them. We see that Hosea's words were for the children of Israel in the context of the upcoming judgment. Hosea probably spoke these words during the reign of King Jeroboam of Israel, since that is the only king he addresses in his opening statement. This would have been 40 years before judgment actually fell. God always gives a warning before sending judgment. The prophet Amos tells us that God informs his prophets what he is doing and what he is going to do. Amos 3:7. Surely the Lord God does nothing unless he reveals his secret to his servants the prophets. 40 is the number of testing and trial. Israel had failed her test and refused to return to God. As we continue with the study of Hosea, God will lay out his charges against Israel. I'm Brenda Cathcart for Moed Ministries International. Shalom and be blessed.